She picked the wrong guy to be her beard, I guess, or whatever.
Yes. Welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is the Drunkduck QUACKCAST. I'm Ozone Ocean, QUACKCAST number 517. So this week we're talking about the interesting topic of mental health. No, that was last week. Now, this week we're talking about Trekonomics. Oh my god, such a weird subject. But Baines made a really interesting post about the utopian world of Star Trek and how they handle money, like a world with no money. This is a fictional world with no money. So this does sort of fit into, our remit as talking about webcomics and stuff, because, making a fictional world with no money, how do you do that? That's damn interesting. Because most sci-fi, like 99.9999999% of all sci-fi, at least from the last 30 years, is dystopian. And it all, tackles worlds that are turning to crap, and our heroes have to survive in it despite the shittiness of the world they find themselves in. Whereas good old Star Trek is a utopia, and there's not much of that around. It's really hugely rare. But it's not just a utopia for the sake of it. They've actually made a working utopia. They've actually, done the work and created something that functions. And it's a world with no money that actually, makes sense. Even though for us it's a really hard thing to understand. Which also makes it really good to sort of examine from a writing perspective, and a person who creates fiction, because creating that kind of concept is, quite unusual and not that easy. So we're going to examine it and see how it works and why it works. And that will inform us about creation in general, I think. What do you reckon, Baines?
I do reckon.
You do reckon. Well, so before we get into that, I've got to bring up the featured comic. Featured comic. So I featured a comic this week. And it was The Sparrow. The Sparrow. So I will tell you now about The Sparrow.
Wonderful.
Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was The Sparrow. We've talked about superheroes being like gods, setting themselves up as gods, and maybe even some of them being gods. But what if they all were? Demigods, that is, coming from a celestial pantheon. That'd mean their enemies are probably similarly mythologically derived. That's the story here with the Sparrow. This young man finds that he's the son of the sun god, Apollo, and he has control over solar powers. It'll be fun finding where mythology, fantasy, and superhero fiction cross over here in the superhero webcomic. The art is slick, full color, and digital. The story is giving us a nicely paced intro. It's superhero urban fantasy action. It's always fun to feature a superhero comic because, superheroes were one of the main styles of comics that most of us had an intro into the whole media. But not many of us do superhero comics on Drunkduck. I certainly don't. I've never really been a superhero person at all. I don't even read superhero comics generally, but they are the most popular format in the mainstream media, and it's always good to dip back into the style and see someone doing it really well, as it is done with the Sparrow. So it's a really cool experiment with the whole idea, and a slight reinvention on it too. I mean, not extremely reinvention, because people have trod this path before in various ways, but I haven't really seen it done this way myself, so I like it. This fellow is actually a demigod, and in mainstream media, of course, we have Thor, and there's even a Hercules version as well, Hercules kind of thing in Marvel or DC, I'm not sure which. But in this world, this character is just an unnamed demigod. He's not, stealing the traits of a major god to make his story. He's a new demigod. And the reason why that's interesting to me is because, in the Greek mythology, there were all these demigods because Zeus was screwing around. All these gods were screwing around. So this isn't a reinvention of the way they make gods. This is just a typical way the Greek pantheon made demigods. But he's a superhero instead of, taking his place in the Elysian Fields or, Mount Olympus. So I like this. I like the way it's structured. Anyway, so I hope you read The Sparrow, and it's by Mika Draws, and it's rated T for teen.
And that was our featured comic, A Sparrow. Okay. Next up, we have our featured music. And the music this week, Gumwallace is back again. He's fixed himself. He's repaired his body. He rebuilt himself. Thank goodness. Yay. So our mechanical man in New Zealand is fit as a fiddle. Once again, he's back and all that stuff. It's awesome. So he's given us a theme to The Next Town Over, which was the comic I featured 2 weeks ago about the cowboy steampunk magic stuff, which is really cool, with the amazing artwork, which you should all check out. So, Next Town Over. The trains are coming. Hop on and go for a ride. Get off at the next town over if you like. It'll be rolling on through soon, just like this energetic, highly rhythmic track that pounds and thumps along with great energy and momentum with all the power of a fully laden steam train. So, check out The Next Town Over by Gummel. And that was the featured music, which is a great comic by Emihilos. So I hope you enjoy that particular comic and the music based on it by Mr. Gumwallace. So, right, we were going to talk about treeconomics, which is, you buy all the tribbles and then you sell the tribbles and you make lots of money. So you got to breed the tribbles properly, and yeah, that's the way you do it.
That's right. There were lots of side characters in Star Trek from its whole history who were profit-driven. They were aliens or from alien cultures, right? And they were trying to sell this or sell that, or then later we have the Ferengi who are very profit-driven and all that kind of stuff. That shows up all over, but the main characters and the little bit we see of Earth and the quite a bit we hear about Earth is we've evolved, humanity's evolved beyond the enough to solve the problems like disease, poverty, war, and all this kind of stuff. It's all been dealt with, and also they don't use money. They have endless resources also.
Yeah.
Which I saw a sort of thing on YouTube one time talking about is Star Trek a socialist utopia, quote unquote, and and then the idea was in this YouTube thing. I don't know why everyone on YouTube is extremely right wing, but I won't go into all that. It's kind of strange.
Extremely right wing.
In a way, yeah. It's I don't know, but yeah, forget about that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But he was his conclusion was, well, okay, if your resources are unlimited, then you could have some socialist policies, only if they're unlimited resources. That's always, I found that funny, like, strange. But in any case,
Oh, please go on.
Oh yeah, because
yeah, in any case, their resources are basically unlimited. Nobody sort of suffers economically. Although the details, since, I mean, as Oz has said, like, we're on a starship. It's an exploration quasi-military organization, so there's not really money at play. Like, they have what they need and they're on the ship. And most of what we hear about life on Earth and other human planets is just sort of as an aside, or to lecture aliens or something like that about, well, here's what we managed to do, and so the details are a little sketchy. It's like, oh, well, you solved all disease, you solved like conflict, like everyone has at least like a baseline, like a good life, and beyond that, there's no money. Like, we don't use money, which I know some later Star Trek writers struggled with that concept, like, and going like, well, how does that work? And like replicators, like, how does society even function? Like, it's so luxurious and it's so like every need is at the tip of your fingers. Like, how does society even function? Like, we don't really see the actual mechanics of it. But I mean, the bones are there, and it's well thought out, like you said, Oz, earlier. But yeah, even though the exact details, the exact mechanics are left kind of vague, kind of left to your imagination in a lot of cases, it's like we don't use money, we don't have suffering, poverty, blah blah blah. It's paradise. It's like everything we want.
Yeah, I think later writers might have, the conflict bug. There's no story without conflict, and they mistake it. They think, oh well, that means the world has to be secretly bad in some way, and they sabotage the bones of the world in order to create
the really modern versions of Star Trek. Yeah, it's kind of gone off the rails, I think.
Which is unnecessary. Exactly. You don't have to do that in a world. You can have a perfect world and still have conflict and disaster without having the world being secretly evil, because we have fantastic situations in our own planet in reality where where there's still conflict. You don't have to have the government secretly being nasty and evil and all this kind of happen in order to have an interesting story. You can have an interesting story just in a set in a kitchen in a family. There's conflict. Yeah. You can make it anywhere if you're good enough writer. So I think that's just a modern trait of bad writing. But anyway, yeah. So the Star Trek world with its utopia. Well, what I mentioned was that it's basically a military utopia. I didn't coin that. It's not my idea. I first heard that from the creators of Futurama, and they were saying, "Oh, we want to create like an interesting world, but we don't want to go for the whole military utopia that other people have gone for." And so they have their Space Force is like a joke version of Captain Kirk's Star Trek, with the captain being this pot-bellied guy who's self-aggrandizing and destroying everything. But the reality is most sci-fi isn't a military utopia. There's very few bits of sci-fi that do actually follow that, and Star Trek Next Generation is particularly one of the notable exceptions to this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the whole no money thing. The thing I brought up was the fact that, say, it's very easy to realize this if you think about, say, the world of the military, because in the military, from what I've heard about, I haven't served myself, but you have a few particular drivers to get people to behave and, to advance and to function well within that society. You have rank, people obey rank automatically, and people want to attain rank. You have peer pressure from, wanting to fit in and behave well, and be seen to behave well. There's punishments, of course. And what was the third one? I wrote it all down in the comments here. Yeah, so you have you have the peer pressure, you have oh damn it. I actually did peer pressure, you have rank, you have power and status. So there's those things. Yeah, so you want to achieve power and status by going up the rank. See, money isn't a factor within, in the serving military. Obviously, if you're like on a base or something like this, or you're in, you're not deployed, you can do something with your money. But when you're deployed, you can't do much with your money. There's not really anything to spend it on, and people just save and save and save. So that's really not a factor that drives drives behavior or drives ambition or anything else. It's those other things, which is quite like in the world of Star Trek, because they don't need money to get what they want. Resources are unlimited. They've got replicators, so they can make special items. They don't need to learn to build them or pay someone else to build them. And sickness and all that kind of stuff is looked after. And if they want to learn something, it takes work to learn it. And if they want to advance in rank and get to some kind of, they want to become an archaeologist or an explorer or something like this, they actually have to work to learn that. So it's not just, things aren't just given to them. You still have to actually achieve these things. So it is a world that, that does have internal logic, and it does function, and it doesn't need money. So it actually does work. Where it comes into that situation is when you're dealing with outside forces. But yeah, it could be a blueprint for our world if we did have unlimited resources and if we did have replication technology, because that's one specific thing. It's not a socialist utopia because they don't have to share. Like, socialism implies a community that comes together and shares things to make the most of it, and so everyone's got, enough. Whereas that world, they don't need to do that because everyone's got enough anyway. So it just, I mean, they do all work together. There's that, but they don't.
That's implicit. It is implicit that they all work together. Like that's the focus, and that this was created. Their paradise civilization was created on purpose, and that's how they managed. At least this is how I read it. That it was with concerted effort and with a focus on, like, we lift each other up. Like this will serve everyone, and that's how you get these amazing technological advances. And replicators.
Socialist in that regard, in that they all function together as a community, as a society, and they're not like running off and saying, "Yep, this is my little patch, and I'm going to shoot anyone who comes near me, and we're just gonna sit here and guard our own little area from everyone else, and not help anyone else, and not accept help." So they definitely socialist in that regard. So there's different aspects to it, but it's go on, Tan.
The sheer idea of the state, the existence of the state, however that state is organized, is intrinsically, to an extent, socialist. In which sense? You may have an uber-capitalist system, or you may have feudalism, or you may have, you name it, whatever can be as far as possible on the opposite edge of the spectrum to socialism. However, the fact that you have a state implies that you have a some of people that have come together to all be protected or enjoy or partake in a specific commodity, usually non-tangible, like the idea that if we are attacked, we will be protected by the strong members of the community.
Mhm.
So that is socialism. You share the strength that the few have, who are supposed at least to protect everybody else, including the weak, the ones that cannot protect themselves. So, I mean, even if in feudalism, if you wanted to keep your territory, you would need to protect your peasants, because then you wouldn't have any means of protection. So anyway, the idea behind it, if you sit down to think about it, is that if you don't want socialism, in essence, you don't want to have a state. It goes that far. That said, the idea that you have unlimited resources is, of course, unrealistic, and in my opinion, completely unnecessary to create a moneyless society. What you do need is to have a different organization within the system. Has to be different in the sense that you don't need to barter and trade anything, because the universal concept is that everybody helps by adding their own stuff to the common goal of everyone being able to survive and having the necessary things, and so on and so forth. And you have a different quote unquote currency, in the sense that gratification and reinforcement to keep adding to the society, to keep contributing and doing your part, doesn't come from remuneration in the terms of money, of any kind of payment, but in other reinforcers that are also universal. Because money is a universal reinforcer. It's something that you can use to do whatever you like. So you replace it with a different universal reinforcer, and you have moneyless society working just as well, probably with a lot less heartache, because people will have, the necessities of life at least. So that's my opinion, if you like.
That's well said, I think. I mean, that holds true. And there's, proclamations about it in early Star Trek: The Next Generation, I think, that like the purpose in life is not the acquisition of wealth and things. It's to improve yourself and enrich yourself. Like, self-actualization, I guess.
Well, yeah, and they're scientists, so they're discovering new things. Everyone's kind of making their name, and that's the driver for, or artists, there's also those, and the driver for their life is the creation and enriching of society. I'm putting my name on this new species I've discovered, or this new process, or this new robotics thing, or creating a painting.
There's definitely things of like personal pride and like people competing with each other. You see some friendly and maybe even not so friendly rivalry, sibling rivalry, and like people with disappointed adults with disappointed parents. Like a lot of conflicts that we have now are still there. You see that kind of stuff play out.
Professional rivalries.
The one thing I have to say, and it might sound cynical, but I really need to say it, is that even if we had unlimited resources, which in certain categories we do, okay, but assume if we had unlimited resources about anything, and we had the replicators that could give us anything and everything, you know, all of that. I guarantee you, I would bet money on it. I would bet money on it that you would have a very select few that would hog the source of the unlimited resources, and the replicators and the, you know, everything, and they would fabricate a situation of limited resources to perpetuate this particular system. If you have a society that still operates in these principles that we operate right now, it's not the issue of having or not having resources, or unlimited or limited or many or whatever. It is an issue of whether people feel that the only way to exist and be successful and be actualized and be, you know, whatever it is that society rewards is to hog all the resources, to be in control of everything that the other people need.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have that as your ultimate goal that society puts before you, you could have the universe and it still would not be enough. So,
Right? Like the acquisition of power is like sort of a deep driver in humanity. That's the interesting thing about Star Trek that always fired my imagination ever since I became a fan with Next Generation, was like the psychological part of it, and like those dark impulses. We've, like, obviously humanity found a way to conquer them and to educate itself, humanity, well enough, or to be disciplined enough or something to have those things not be an issue. And it's a good argument also, like you said earlier, that there's the existence of a state that's mandating, you know, hey, it's all shared. I don't know if everybody gets a replicator. It seems like it, you know, a lot of characters, at least on Star Trek, don't know how to cook. It's completely alien to them, it seems like. Some of them do know how to cook, but it's like, seems like it's a hobby and it's not necessary. So we can assume every house has a replicator, you know, the way, you know, every house has a fridge, maybe generally in the developed world.
Yeah.
But anyway, always interesting to me how like the education was figured out somehow. The psychological thing was figured out somehow, where they overcame these dark impulses in large part and were able to build this utopia on Earth. That's very interesting to think about the dynamics and how they actually work. You know?
Well, they do still have murderers and people who want to achieve greatness and they can't do it, so they fake it and pretend and con their way in. And they've tackled those in stories, which is rather interesting. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the people who want to achieve status, which is the main driver rather than acquisition of wealth, and can't do it the normal way, so cheat and get caught for it, which is, you know, totally within the logic of the world, because, you know, it's a world that exists on status and meritocracy and all that kind of stuff. And so if you have a world that does that, then where do you have the conflict? By people being upset because they couldn't attain those goals, or embarrassing their families, like you said, Baines, with the whole disappointing parents and all this. So yeah, they do acknowledge those flaws in the world. Like when people, like you were saying, do these modern kind of rewrites and stuff like that, and they can't grasp it. It's only because they have limited imagination or limited knowledge, or they're stuck in their worldview of today's world without really properly putting themselves into that world to see how it would work, I think.
Yeah.
That's where the main flaw is. Like, I recently watched the entirety of, at least the first season, I don't know if there's another season, of the Star Trek comedy animation called Below Decks. If you've heard of that.
Oh, right, yeah. Heard of it, yeah.
And so that postulates, this is a silly comedy, but the idea is based on, okay, the story happens around the below decks. These aren't the main character. These aren't the main bridge crew. The main alpha team. This is like the beta team. These are the guys who are ensigns, and they haven't picked up rank yet, so they have to do all the odd jobs and all that kind of stuff. So it's the conflict between them. But it is written by someone who doesn't really get Star Trek, I think, because although the characters comment on Star Trek and sort of bring up classic things from classic episodes, the characters don't act like they're within that world. They act like sitcom characters. They're self-aggrandizing. There's the nerdy character who likes nerdy things, and then there's the go-getter character who likes, go-getter things. Whereas in the world of Star Trek, a character who's into nerdy things is every frickin' main character. There is no nerd in Star Trek, because they all like playing the violin in their spare time, and they like their cats, and they like their, this and that. There's no go-getter character who's a jock who's good at everything, and that's a good main character. That's not in Star Trek. Those characters are sidelined, or just brutes who we don't even regard seriously until they do show their nerdy side. But yeah, this comedy is based around traditional comic tropes, which don't really fit into the world. But it's funny regardless. But yeah, it's just interesting how it doesn't work. And they do bring up aspects of, money and status to some regard, which is, again, it's by someone who really doesn't get the world. I think that's really important. Like, we've talked about Star Wars too, and why that doesn't work. It's because the writers don't really get the world. They're not involved. They get the tropes and they get the superficialities, but they don't really understand how this world would work. And if you can't do that, you can't create stories that really do, reflect how the world should be. And they're odd fits. Yeah. But I won't go into Star Wars because we're not talking about that. But yeah. Anyway,
good point. I think that's very well said. Yeah, and I haven't seen a lot of new Star Trek. I've seen most of the Picard show, and it's I don't know. It's hard to put it in the same. I haven't seen Discovery. I haven't seen Lower Decks, but it's based on Picard and like what I've heard about the shows. It's hard to put them in the same category as the sort of the 60s up until 2000 or whatever, the kind of connected world of the original series up to Voyager or Enterprise. I haven't even seen Enterprise really either, but Star Trek original up to Voyager seems to share, like, with its ups and downs, like it seems to share a world and a vocabulary. And they kind of push it as the series went on into DS9 and Voyager. They pushed it where they could, in terms of people being able to have more conflicts than desired in early Next Generation and stuff like that. But yeah, then I don't know, what's my point. The new stuff doesn't really seem to quite fit. At least mostly based on Picard. It's like it doesn't feel like the same world anymore. It's like this is different. It's more dystopian. It's depressing. I won't go into all that, but it makes me sad.
Well, I didn't, no, I didn't like.
And it also just doesn't seem consistent with what the world is.
I didn't like Enterprise, but they can get away with structuring that world differently because it's a prequel. So it was depicting it.
It's pre-original, like way before the original series, like 100 years or something, isn't it?
Yeah. They
Am I
were
right?
depicting it at an earlier stage. I didn't like it, but it had its own internal consistency, so it wasn't doing things the wrong way. So yeah, it had reasons for departing from the utopian world. But yeah,
for sure.
These other ones don't. Star Trek Voyager had its reasons. And it made sense. These are the typical human Federation people, but they've had to join with the Maquis, which are terrorists fighting the Kim Kardashian and her mates. They because they got blasted into a new area of space, and they lost half their crew. The Maquis lost half their crew, so they had to band together with these terrorists. So these are humans who aren't part of the Federation. These are humans who exist on the fringe, so they have a slightly different society. So they're a bit wilder. And together, we've got humans and aliens blasting off into this unfamiliar part of the galaxy. Even though they've got their little bubble of Federation in this little Voyager, they still have to deal with these alien races, and they haven't got unlimited resources. They have to ration everything. They have to ration people's use of the replicators and the holodeck and everything. Everything's rationed on the ship, and they run out of things, and things break down. So they have to go and get stuff from other planets, and they have to pay them in work and resources, and they have to trade. So even though they don't have money, they don't use money themselves, and but they are rationing, they still have to work out an economic method of working with other alien groups in order to acquire what they need for their starship to function. So that was quite interesting. So
right. Yeah.
But again, it's internally consistent. They still don't break down and say, yeah, there's no money, but wink, wink, we still barter, or we still have money in a different way.
Yeah, just to manufacture a story or something.
Yeah, they still, it's so well thought out that Trickonomics still functions. But, as I say, that's a military, system, so certain different rules apply to normal society. We don't really see the normal society very much. Like, I think the most we've seen of the normal society is when we see bloody Cisco and his frickin' family down in New Orleans every 5 minutes.
Yeah, right. We see quite a bit of Earth on Deep Space Nine, compared to the other shows. And Cisco's dad owns a restaurant and owns and operates this, Cajun restaurant, or is it New Orleans or something?
Yeah.
So that raises the question. Okay, well, if there's no money, and that doesn't matter. He runs this thing because he loves it, and he's like gets really good at cooking and stuff like that. And he at one point the restaurant's closed down because of a crisis. And
the question I would have is if they still have the replicators, can't they all replicate whatever it is they like?
Yeah.
So
they've developed.
Maybe it's a social thing, but it's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, they've developed various rationales for that, because the idea is replicator food is good, but it's not always it's not always perfect, and it doesn't have those individual touches that a good chef will bring to a meal. And again, like Bain says, there's the social aspect, because when you're going to a restaurant, it's a different experience to cooking at home or having a microwave meal or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's the different things.
But yeah, that's true. It's a good point. They've occasionally said that, the replicator has never quite managed to capture it. Or people will drink the replicated booze and spit it out. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. This isn't what it's supposed to be.
Replicated. Well, you can imagine that would be true too, because things made to a formula are quite different from things made to, the individual touches of a skilled chef.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if that is true, and the replicator is making the things, but they are subpar, then you don't actually have unlimited resources, because you have unlimited second-rate resources that are not as satisfactory as the original limited resources commodities. So if that is the case, then you haven't solved your problem according to this reasoning that we have no money because we have the replicators and therefore we have unlimited resources, blah, 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 blah. So
I don't.
what happens there then? So
I don't.
Yeah, like
see
what
what
if
I mean?
people want real chicken? But no, well, everyone can have replicated chicken, but how is it decided? Like, what if everyone wants
Real chicken.
home cooked chicken?
I don't
Yeah.
think the.
Or
exactly.
like exactly like a real chicken, you know,
Looks like my internet's
in the
cutting out
sense
again.
that you have I don't know, bacon flavor.
It's the bacon flavored what?
I said everyone knows crisps or snacks or Cheetos that are bacon flavored, but those people that like bacon will never prefer the Cheeto bacon flavor to the actual bacon flavor. So that means that if you have replicators that create subpar versions of things that exist and are limited in resources, you have a moneyless society that has unlimited subpar resources, but then if you want access to the good stuff, the stuff that is the original, then how do you gain access to those that are limited resources? If we accept the concept that the reason they have a moneyless society is because they have the replicators and because the resources are unlimited, for the limited resources, they would need to revert back to a money-based society, or at least barter or trade. So, not that, barter. So,
Well,
you either need to have replicators that are perfect and do the thing as they are supposed to be doing it, or you ruin the premise. That's my point.
It wasn't so much that the replicators were subpar. Maybe the old-fashioned ones were. The idea was that, the perfect thing that is standard is very different from a perfect thing that is created as a piece of art. Like I could go down to the shops and I can buy perfectly structured wine glasses and I could buy 100 of them. They're all like made absolutely fantastic. But then again, I could go to an artisan and he or she could craft me an individual wine glass that I would treasure more than this 100 wine glasses that are perfect that I've bought. And even though this individual one is being created by this artisan and it might have flaws, might have bubbles, might be slightly uneven, but I would treasure it more because it's the individuality of it and the specialness of it. So I think that's where the story structure comes into it with the replicator stuff. It's not that they're subpar. It's the idea of wanting something special and unique within a world where you can get anything you want. So you value more unique things. And that's like in today's society as well, with the rise of the artisan class, people who create things on Etsy and individual creators who make things and sell them through eBay and stuff. It's like we can get these backpacks and clothes and outfits, as much as we want, pretty cheap. And they're fantastic looking and they held together really well. But if you want something individual and that no one else has, you have to make these special deals and seek them out or learn to make them yourselves. And it's created this new kind of parallel economy, whereas we pay for stuff. But I think that's the original idea in that whole Star Trek Next Generation thing. It's that they value like the individual flair, but they're not necessarily going to pay for it, but they have different ways of acquiring it, like special favors to people, or it's a more social capital.
Okay, that could be it, absolutely. But then that could be bad writing, okay? But you wouldn't have um, whoever was having the whiskey from the replicator spit it out because it's nothing like whiskey. What I mean to say is that if you have your perfect wine glass that is exactly the same as 100 wine glasses, it may not be unique and crafted especially for you or whatever, but it will be a wine glass that is perfectly serviceable, or at least, or that it completes the requirements. You wouldn't say, oh, this is not a wine glass, I cannot have my wine in this. You see what I mean?
Someone might. Some person. I mean, this is more.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, and of course, taste is more tangible in this. What I'm saying is that it wouldn't be. You may prefer, and that's a matter of preference, that you prefer the uniquely made thing, but you wouldn't be reasonably saying that the thing that is mass produced is not within that same category.
I think again
that should not be category.
I think again those characters who were spitting out the liquor were Klingons, so I don't think they were part of the Federation. And the other characters who were complaining about that, who were human, were like they were the ones who preferred the real Klingon kind of gear. So
and the other one might have been Scotty, who was frozen in a transporter for 70 years, and then he came out in next gen time.
Okay, so that's
but that's true. Yeah, true.
Yeah. So that the concept would be that if everyone agreed that the replicators didn't make the things that they should, but yeah, if they do, then we are on. But I still think that you would need the restructuring of society even with unlimited resources. Otherwise, you would have the unlimited resource gatekeepers.
Definitely, and there's still this. I think within the way they've structured the story, there's a lot of characters who exist. They're human characters who exist on the fringes of the Federation, and they tend to be like these loners and these people. As they become like collectors or traders or whatever, and they're very acquisitive. They want to acquire like very unique things, and so they make deals with aliens and stuff like that to get these unique objects and hoard them. So that does exist, but that's normally on the fringes.
Yeah, but that's not really the issue, because if you have unlimited resources and you might be a collector, whatever, who cares? Now I was thinking about the unlimited resource regulating thing. That if you take the example of diamonds in society now, as we have it, diamonds theoretically, at least as far as I have read about, because I'm not a savant on that, is that the actual existence, like the sum of the number of diamonds that exist and are available, are such that do not justify the price that they have. Go by the law of supply and demand. However, the price is artificially kept high by not allowing the market to have access to as many diamonds as there exist, or some such thing. I don't remember it completely, but the idea is that there is a fabrication of rarity, quote unquote, to keep the price and the status symbol to a certain level. So.
Oh yeah, De Beers with the hoarding of diamonds, which started like 100 years ago or something like this. 110 years ago, they had they structured the whole thing in order to hoard the diamonds and control the market. So and create the market for diamonds, because diamonds are a reasonably common thing, and now they are they're not common, but they're not as rare as the price would indicate, as Tance said, and they were turned into a super rare commodity because of the way they're hoarded and they're regulated. As we can even make artificial diamonds, which are functionally no different. Yeah, we can replicate them. Functionally no different from the real thing. We can even make large size ones now as well. So it's carbon, for frick's sake. One of the most common elements on the planet.
So there you have it. I mean, see, we can replicate diamonds. Natural diamonds exist a lot, like in prevalence, let's say, reasonably prevalence in the world. And we still have super expensive diamonds, bloody diamonds, or blood diamonds. I'm not sure exactly how they're called. And all sorts of really shady situations going on around diamonds. And theoretically, since we can replicate diamonds, they are an unlimited resource. So
yes, there's a societal structure that has to happen, like you say, as well. It's just not unlimited resources and unlimited power on its own. Has to be a lot of things. Like who makes the point in the comments here? I think it's Morgan made a comment that you need money for people to do jobs that aren't desirable, garbage man and all that kind of stuff. But of course you can reason that away in the world of Star Trek, because it's a high technology world. These things are automated. You can these things are automated, but as well, if you have a society structured a particular way, again, like garbage men or whatever, is not necessarily
people who operate or program those machines.
Yeah, but they're not necessarily a low status job. It's not necessarily something that someone would not want to do. Like, you could take great pride at this. It could be like your greatest achievement in order to create the best disposal system that the society has had. This could be keeping things clean.
Even exactly, and even if you had like the super traditional garbage man, the one that manually goes to collect, the garbage bags from everywhere and stuff. If that was valued as an almost paramedic level service, because it is hygiene preservation for, large scale, clusters of residences and stuff. I don't have the vocabulary right now. The
communities.
Yes, thank you. So that would be a high status job, and doctors were not very high status not too long ago. Some were even considered a really dirty job, a job that wasn't for honorable people. It really all depends on how society assigns value. Money in itself is an empty concept. It represents the value that is placed arbitrarily by society on specific roles. So a healthy society, in my opinion, would ascribe high value to every single job that if it were to not be done, would present serious functional issues to society. Because every time the garbage men and women, the unions go on strike, we fear that we will have the plague. So there is a very specific service that these people are offering, and that's, in my opinion, insult to injury, that they have to deal with all this noxious stimulation and not enjoy status for actually doing it. And the fact that it is low skill has nothing to do with it, because it is a very demanding job, in my opinion. So what it should not have value would be to be a hedge fund manager or something like that, because that can actually, society can move on without hedge funds and stuff like that. So a healthy society would ascribe value to things that preserve, first of all, life, then environment, which is also preservation of life, then peace within the community, and actualization and health, mental health, physical health, all of these things.
Food production, that kind of stuff.
Food production, like, for example, they devalue artists, but art is something that is vitally needed. Even in order to push your, crappy product, you have to have artists create, all the artistic elements that will frame your product and make it, noteworthy to the people in general, to audiences. So what I'm saying is that people do not ascribe value where it should be ascribed, because they value money as if that is what ascribes value to people, where it's actually the other way around. Money goes where value is ascribed.
Yeah.
So
Very much so.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
Well, yeah, so the world of Star Trek, The Next Generation at least, and those 1990s derived iterations of the franchise really do point to a good way of doing things. They're intelligently structured, and they go beyond simple conflict equals story. They actually create a world that makes sense, and people who have value, which is a very positive thing. So that's something to think about especially when you create your worlds. You don't always have to have a shitty world. You can create actually a more interesting story if you have a well-functioning world and have your characters being shitty within it. That makes things a bit more interesting.
yeah, it would be like a Lothlorien. There is no evil here unless people bring it with them.
Exactly. Precisely. Yeah. Which I find is very interesting, because actually when we have a lot of stories, say, set in modern day America or Europe and all sorts of places, there's no like war as the background or like breaking down of society. But you can still have a really interesting story beside that. And you do. There's millions and millions of interesting stories without the world breaking down and turning to shit. So there's a prototype in our very own world that says you can do it. Okay. Well, this has been QUACKCAST number 517. The lovely tarts and the wonderful beans. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
We're going to Botany
Make
Bay.
it so.
Oh, make it so.